Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. Love is one of the most confusing words in the English language. Everybody agrees that love is the most important thing, but the word can mean or point to so many things. Our guest today has written a book that sheds light on the true meaning of love and shares practices and meditations that help love endure in the face of accelerating rates of change. Obviously, relationships and circumstances are altered by time, and the result can be feelings of loss or disappointment or worse. How can love endure in the face of life's unpredictable challenges? How can change, inevitably including pain and loss, support rather than diminish love? These are some of the questions that we will investigate on Pathways today. Our guest is Dr. Matthew McKay, author of the book, Love in the Time of Impermanence. Matt is a clinical psychologist, professor of psychology at the Wright Institute, co-founder of Haight Ashbury Psychological Services, founder of the Berkeley CBT Clinic, and co-founder of the Bay Area Trauma Recovery Clinic, which serves low-income clients. He has also authored and co-authored more than 40 books, including the Relaxation and Stress Reduction Workbook, and more recently, Seeking Jordan. Well, hello, Matt, and welcome to the Pathways Show.
Hi, glad to be with you, Paul.
So, I don't know if I should mention this, but I lived in the Haight Ashbury in 1969. I was a couple blocks away. I probably could have used your clinic back then, but if it existed yet. But I just thought that was a kind of a nice synchronicity there.
Yeah, I lived there too. Same era. I lived in a truck on the Panhandle on Fell Street.
Well, I was going to the University of San Francisco, which was a block away from the Panhandle.
I mean, you went to USF. I went there.
You did?
I graduated in '69.
Oh, fantastic! Well, I was just starting then, and I had my first LSD trip in the Panhandle of Golden Gate Park. So we have a lot that we could BS about, but let's talk about your book. And I'm curious, what specifically in your background conditioned or inspired you to write Love in a Time of Impermanence?
Well, part of it is just the experience of loss, of what it means to lose someone you love deeply. My son died 14 years ago, and I set out on a path to find him, to somehow connect in the face of that loss, to be able to converse with him on the other side, and in that process realize that we never lose anyone we love, and they are there even after death, and we're able to reach them, and they're able to reach us. I mean, that was part of what led me to want to do that work. But I also, I'm a psychotherapist, a psychologist, and over the last 45 years, I've worked a lot with couples, and I've witnessed the death of love. I've witnessed how people lose that sense of connection to each other, that bond, and I wanted to explore ways that I've learned that we can keep love alive in the face of all the changes, all the losses, and the pain that we experience in this life, because pain makes us oftentimes run from each other, run from love, and how can we hold on to love or even strengthen love in the face of that pain, in the face of those changes and losses?
Right. Yeah. That reminds me of the law of impermanence in Buddhism, which states that everything's always changing. This is obvious, we know this, but it seems like our concept of love, for a lot of people, romantic love, kind of butts up against the law of impermanence, because it's like we want to have this, we get fixated on having a permanent solution, live happily ever after, or whatever. And what's ironic in terms of what you are presenting here is that maybe there is a way to have a permanent solution, but it's not what we think. It's not based on fantasy. And your experience with your son was an object lesson for you, right?
It was a huge lesson that, death doesn't change relationships. It doesn't change love. It has no dominion over love. Love actually um, is far stronger than death and all the changes that we experience. But it's also true, I think, that we start out in our lives thinking that we can love someone, or even some things. I mean, we can love things too, but we can love, and it will just stay as it is. It'll never change. There'll be no losses connected to it. Nothing will hurt. And deeper in that idea is the belief that love is a feeling. The feeling of being in love, or just that love is an emotion. And in fact, what we now know, and what is so clear also on a spiritual level, is that love isn't an emotion, because emotions come and go, and our feelings of love for each other surge and recede. And that in fact, probably most of the time, people who love each other don't actually feel love. So what is this thing that connects them?
It's
What
amazing.
is
It's
what is
amazing
love?
because the feeling definition of love has such currency and primacy in our discourse in our society. Are you feeling it? That's what, or I'm not feeling it. Those are definitive statements, and yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, or I fell out of love and it's gone, and that's the end of that. That's the end of the relationship. That's the end of my connection to you, or my bond to you. And what I'm suggesting, and what has become clearer and clearer to me over all these years of working with couples, is that love isn't a feeling. It is action. It is doing. It is how we engage with each other. And the feelings come and go, but but love is actually four different things. I mean, first of all, it's caring. You care about the well-being of this of the other. It matters to you. The second thing is, that that person you love. It's not a projection. It's not a fantasy. It's not something made up. You actually know and are committed to knowing. And each day that person changes, evolves, shifts, new things happen to them, new experiences, and you're committed to knowing them as they are right now, as they are evolving and changing, growing, diminishing, being damaged by time and losses, whatever is happening to them, you're committed to knowing it and seeing it. So that's the second part of love. The third part is compassion. It's like being able to recognize the pain that the ones we love experience, and knowing that that pain is the same as ours. We know that their pain is real, and they struggle with it in the same way we know our own pain is real, and we struggle with that. And so compassion is both being willing to recognize what that other one experiences, and what hurts the other one, but also being, having some sort of commitment to doing something about it, doing something to support, nourish, um, uh, help that other one face the pain. And then the last part of love, the fourth piece, which sort of holds it all together, is intention. It's the intention to turn all of these things into action. It's the intention to turn caring into action, to turn knowing and knowledge and awareness into action, and really continuing to check in and find out about what the person we love and what's going on with them, and the intention to turn compassion into action. So love is really all about action, but it's about turning care, knowledge, and compassion into behavior every single day.
Well, let's talk about these elements of love, as you call them, and let's talk about knowledge, because that's very interesting. You know, you say love in the absence of knowledge, of truly seeing what we embrace, is an act of projection. You know, and that might be falling in love, I think, is probably what most people would call that. There's so much projection in that you don't really know the person, and you're actually loving a fantasy. So my question is, how much do you need to know in order to love somebody?
An infinite amount. And now that sounds like a facile answer, but what I mean by that is we are constantly changing, constantly growing, evolving, shifting. Uh, our emotions are changing. Our needs are changing. What we know and care about is changing. So because everything keeps changing for whoever we love, the process of knowing them keeps growing. It's an ongoing commitment that happens every day. It's like, understanding what their needs are today. How are their values changing? How are things that matter to them changing? How are their, what's going on in terms of their fears or even their preferences?
So it's a learning process.
Learning constantly about the beloved, and whatever it is that is going on, that's changing. What we knew about them a month ago has changed a little bit.
It seems to me that that's a little bit heroic to go into a relationship. I mean, you don't really know each other, you've just met or whatever, and there's this attraction and there's this ease of projection ability. You can easily project onto somebody that you're attracted to, but yet if you really want to love them, according to Matthew McKay, you've got to undergo the learning process in order to become disillusioned and probably lose some of that wonderful euphoric feeling that comes with the projection of fantasy.
Yeah, well, the projection of our ideal.
That's right.
Our ideal is we tend to project that, and having to learn that there's a difference between this person, this human, and our ideal, and seeing them for who they are.
Right.
Yeah, that's a real transition that we have to go through, and then real love depends on that.
Yeah.
Moving from fantasy to the actual truth of this person's experience.
Well, most people don't want to do that. Most people don't want to lose the feeling, and the feeling is dependent upon the fantasy to some extent.
Yeah, and in trying to hold on to the fantasy and the feeling, and then the ultimate disappointment that the person is not that fantasy, they're not going to generate that feeling all the time in you. In holding on to the fantasy, we end up losing love.
Right. Well, we probably never had it in the first place if it was like just fantasy.
Yeah. And then what happens is this, if I can add this point. So we don't know the person, or we know them somewhat, but we don't really keep learning about them. We don't keep adding a deeper and deeper awareness of who they are and what their new experiences are. And we don't do that. And then what happens is we start getting kind of disappointed. And the person isn't quite what we want them to be.
Right. And they're not conforming to our efforts to train them to adapt to our fantasies.
Yeah, that's right. They're not conveniently going along with what we hope that they would become. Right. And so we do a couple of things. One is we start judging them. And judgment is the death of love. That, I could just tell you that from all of the hundreds of couples I've worked with over the years, judgment is the death of love. As soon as you start saying, okay, this person, you get into these good, bad judgments. That's wrong. That's bad. Why did you do that? That's stupid. As soon as we get into judgment, we start killing the relationship, because the relationship stops being about, this connection, this heart connection between me and you, and this commitment that I have to your well-being. And it starts being about, what can it do for me? Why, I'm disappointed. There's something wrong with you. And so judgment ends up breaking the connection. And then the other thing that starts to happen is we start trying to force the other person to being what we want them to be, instead of accepting who they are and
Right.
learning about it and making room for it. We start trying to force them to be something else. And in that process of forcing, that also starts to destroy love. So we really, get into a lot of trouble when we um, begin to judge and turn the disappointment that the other person isn't quite what we expected into you're bad.
Yeah,
You're not.
I like to say that I think that Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, has an identity crisis. He can't decide whether he's God the judge or the God of love. And I think we are way more impacted. I grew up Catholic, went to Catholic school for 13 years, and I was way more impacted by God the judge than the God of love in terms of like at an immediate level. I was taught to judge myself mercilessly and had, worried about every little sin and, oh, geez. So I think people are preconditioned to be judgmental. But I'm following what you're saying. I think you're absolutely right. It's just a hard tendency to overcome when you've been conditioned to, believe that that's
That's very true what you're saying. I grew up Catholic, otherwise we wouldn't have ended up at USF together. Um, and I know what you're talking about. There's a lot of judgment embedded in Catholic theology. There's a lot of good and bad. But there's another thing that goes on psychologically, and what that is, in my experience, is something hurts. So I'm in a relationship, just and I care for someone, I love somebody. We're in a relationship of some kind, and they disappoint me, or they do something that hurts me, or they say something that makes me feel bad about myself. So I end up, I'm feeling pain. Um, they didn't live up to my expectations. So there's something painful about that. And then what I do is I externalize, and I'm saying, my pain is your fault. The fact that I feel disappointed, or the fact that I feel hurt, or something happened to me where I experienced some sort of emotional distress in the context of a relationship, that's your fault. You did something bad. And as soon as we take our pain and make it somebody else's fault, now we're in a world of trouble, because love is really threatened then. Because we're no longer really dealing with someone we love. We're dealing with somebody we're manipulating or forcing into being something that we expect.
but there's pain that comes just from living life. Impermanence is going to create disappointment, changes that we don't like, etc. And
Yeah,
so there's a relationship between impermanence itself and pain, right?
yeah. So I'm glad you're saying that, because I think it's so important. Uh, some of the pain that shows up in life and in relationships has to do with impermanence. For example, people change. They're the things that we found, kind of attractive and wonderful about their personalities shift, and they go through traumas, they go through struggles, and some of the ways that they are in the world change. Their bodies change. The ways that they once attracted us sexually and emotionally may change. And so all of this change goes on, and it's painful, because every one of those changes ends up being a loss,
Right.
some sort of loss of something that you once felt like you had, or once felt you could even count on. And so now, in the face of that loss, what do you do? Um, so there's some choices here. Uh, One thing is you get angry. I shouldn't have lost this, or you shouldn't have changed, or what's wrong with you? Why are you like this when you used to be like that? Um, but another approach is to kind of get ready and to anticipate that loss is going to be embedded in every relationship, and that the person we love, whatever we love, is going to change, and that becomes part of our love. It's that our love includes the awareness that the change is going to be there, impermanence is going to be there. They're going to change physically, they're going to change emotionally, they're going to change in the ways they respond to us, and the ways they are in the world. And so all of that's going to happen, and to sort of, kind of get ready for that and embrace it on some level, to appreciate what we have right now, what the experience is right now, knowing that there is going to be change, and that the relationship will shift. I mean, let me give you an example. So my wife and I like to canoe on the Russian River where we have a house, and we're older people, and we go out there and we canoe, and the whole time I'm sort of aware of that's not going to be possible at some point, that we're not going to be able to go out and do that, that
Right.
one or the other or both of us is going to be sick, is going to change our physical capabilities. And so the first thing that happens is kind of being, making, how should I say it, that making room for that, and deeply appreciating, being grateful for this moment, because I know it's not going to last. This is going to change. So let me be grateful for this, but also at the same time, let me kind of make room for the fact that this is going to change, and that we're going to have problems, that we're going to get sick, and that we're going to have to help each other in ways that we don't have to do now. And that's coming. And I can allow that and make room for it, that love will look differently in a little while. But right now, I can also be grateful we're out on the river and enjoying this beautiful day. So those things can both exist side by side.
It's hard to not suffer from anxiety over things like aging, for instance, because, it's change, it's the future, and I've heard it said that anxiety, the opposite of anxiety, which is not something we can ever get rid of, even though we try, it's painful most of the time, is hope. And you write about hope in your book, and hope is a subject I'm passionately interested in, because I want some of that stuff. So tell us about hope.
Well, hope is, in my view, is not the same thing as trying to keep everything the same.
Okay.
Because I mean, like, I hope I don't get sick, or I hope I don't get old, or I hope, my partner always acts exactly like they do right now, and is just as attractive as they are right now. And I hope. So we have lots of hopes, and a lot of the hope has to do with kind of trying to hold back time, or hold back change and impermanence, and that kind of hope ultimately, ultimately kind of fails us in some way. And I guess what I'm suggesting is that instead we can have hope in the power of love. That love is something we don't don't have to lose. We don't ever have to lose love, and we can hope in love and hope in its power. And if we continue to be committed to caring for, knowing, having compassion for, and acting on that caring, knowledge, and compassion with whomever and whatever we love.
Yeah.
That commitment is the hope. And like I can hope in myself that I can continue that commitment.
So the hope is related to courage in a way, because it's your intention and your commitment and your faith that you can follow through, and that love can conquer impermanence in this way. And
my hope is that I can act on love. I can keep behaving from love in the face of all the changes, the hurts, the losses, the pain, the impermanence that accompany my life.
Yeah, and I like what kind of goes along with it in your book, and I love the meditations in the morning where you set your intention to love that day, and it's so helpful, it's so beautiful, and I love the way you talk about how to navigate your life by setting your course toward love and away from the obsessions of self, which is pleasure and freedom from pain or the expectations of others. But the way that you tell us that you got to navigate towards meaning, what's meaningful. And I just think that's just so important, because rather than navigating towards pleasure, meaning is a much more sustainable goal.
So at every crossroad in our life, every moment of choice, and I think that's one of the ways to think about life is a whole series of moments of choice. And at every one of these moments of choice, we can go we navigate, we move toward the thing that we value most. So if we value most pleasure, that's where we steer ourselves. If we value the avoidance of pain, sometimes that looks a little different, then we steer in that direction. If we value power, we steer in that direction.
Right.
Whatever it is that we value becomes our helps us set our compass towards something. And if we value love, and if we set love as our primary value, then at each of those moments of choice, and there are many of them throughout the day, at each of those moments of choice, that value, that priority of love and being love can inform that choice and help us see what direction to take.
Matt, thank you so much for writing the book, for being with us on Pathways today. That what you just said about setting your compass towards love in the most meaningful sense of the word is it's a good place to end, because we have basically run out of time. But I just want to say thank you very much for your work and for being on the show.
Thanks.
And I want to tell our listeners how they can find you on Google. It's not that hard. Matthew McKay, McKay. And you do have a site that's about another book that you wrote, SeekingJordan.com. SeekingJordan.com is mainly focused on the relationship between you and your deceased son, and the book that you wrote, which is channeled as you channeling him, which is a fascinating thing. And I think we should have a show on that. I would really love to have you back sometime. And for our listeners who may have tuned into Pathways late, this is your host, Paul O'Brien, author of Intuitive Intelligence, a book that shares the theme of Pathways, which is personal and cultural evolution. And don't worry, you can play or share this interview whenever you want via the internet or as a free podcast, and I'll tell you how in a minute. Today, we've been visiting with Dr. Matthew McKay, author of the book, Love in the Time of Impermanence. Highly recommend it. And I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into Pathways, which is broadcast and streamed on the internet at www.kboo.fm every other Sunday morning at 8:30 USA Pacific time. And even better, podcasts of today's show, which you can listen to and forward to others, are available for free at divination.com, divination.com, as well as via iTunes and Paulo's YouTube channel, as well as other free podcast servers. So this is Paul O'Brien reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Radio and Podcast. And thanks again to Matthew McKay and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.